Welcome to the Counter Narrative Show. Welcome to everyone who is watching live from Facebook. Welcome even to the people who will probably watch this recording later, and welcome to our guest tonight. Tonight's episode is called Black Women Write. I'm really excited about this particular episode just to be able to highlight and amplify the voices of and the lived experiences also of Black women. Before we get too deep into our topic of what we will be talking about tonight, I just want to have a few moments of reflection, in particular for Black women who have died at the hands of police violence. I have been noticing over, it's a regular going trend that we are very much activated as a collective by the death of Black men, as we should be, at the hands of state violence. And I've also felt like I've noticed that sometimes the mention of Black women who have been killed at the hands of state violence is more, sometimes seems to feel more of an afterthought. I think some of us can name at least 10 Black men who's died at the hands of state violence, and there's probably equal number of Black women, and we can only name a few. So I just want us to have a few moments of reflection in reverence of the Black women who have died at the hands of state violence. And if you know some of those names, please take the time to type them in the chat. And I want to allow this time for 30 seconds of silence starting now. Okay, thank you for that. Again, everyone, thank you for joining us. I am really excited about this particular topic. I wrote a bit about why I'm so excited about it in a recent blog post, because some of the most influential people in my life have been Black women writers. So without further ado, I'll get right into our guest. All of our guests, we have TaRessa Stovall, Brianna Asia, Angela N. Carroll, Deborah M. Ricks, and I'm going to give each one of them a moment in time to tell us a little bit more about themselves. I want to go ahead and start by asking the question, and I'll start it off with Deborah. I'm curious about what led you in the direction of writing? What led you down that path and to writing in the particular way that you write?
My first book was Love Addicted, and it was my story of how I was addicted to love and men because of my relationship with my father, my troubled relationship with my father. And I hadn't seen any talk about Black women being love addicted. And so this book, Love Addicted, wanted to be written, so it's like something wanted to be said, and I was a scribe. It felt like I was just answering the call to put that book into the world.
Mm-hmm. And after you have written that, I know that you've done several other things in addition to the work that you've done around Love Addicted and other things that you've done around women and healing circles. Can you tell us a little bit more about that overall background and some of the other things that you've written and worked on?
Well, my second book was called Why Did He Break Up With Me? And actually Asia has a story in there, and there's 10 like amazing stories in there from Black women sharing who they became, what they learned, how they were hurt, what pains they went through when they experienced a breakup. And I like Toni Morrison had a regret about using her name, Toni Morrison, rather than her birth name for her first book. I regret the title of the book because it doesn't really speak to a lot of Black women. I think a lot of Black women like, no, let's not ask why did he break up with me? Let's ask why did I break up with him? Or it's just, but the book is full of stories and interviews from people around love and relationships. And I think it's important for us to tell our stories, right? And we can't expect anyone else to tell our stories. We have to tell our stories. So when I founded, or I like to say Spirit founded Sisters Gathering to Heal back in 2012, it was around healing Black women's relationship, first with themselves, and then with others. And so I'm passionate about being a Black woman. Like, I'm a Black woman, proud to be a Black woman. And I wouldn't trade it for anything. I wouldn't want to be any other race, any other gender. And so for me, I just want to see us live our fullest lives. You know, I want us to be joyful, powerful, happy, expressive, who we are. Like, thinking about coming here to this space this evening, I was thinking, how do I show up as me, fully as me? And I think every Black woman, I see more and more of us doing that. And what I want to do is be a part of Black women's knowing that we have a right. If we are loud, we're loud. There's no right way to be on this planet. Whatever your race, whatever your gender, sexual orientation, there's no right way. And so my passion is being an example of someone who says, I'm owning me. Toni Morrison says, you are your best thing. You are your best thing.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for that. I definitely think that, you know, one of the questions or one of the things that you said about how do I show up as myself, I feel like that's definitely a thing that has been a little bit more challenging for me. I feel like lately, just with the current circumstances, like particularly like in workspaces or certain spaces, like I have been feeling raw, emotionally raw in a lot of ways. So I think it's important to have spaces and to be able to make spaces where you can show up as your full self. And one of the things I appreciate about some of the work that you've done, Deborah, is you make space for women to be able to show up and heal, not just writing about healing, but you actually make space for people to kind of do just that. Asia, I really like to hear from you about how you came to your writing, and some of the things that you're working on. And even more so, I'd also like to hear about what are some of the things that you're reading right now?
Let's see. I like the Terry McMillan quote that I write because it's cheaper than therapy. Mm. So yeah, I use it as a reflection tool. And, you know, as you know, I'm a teacher as well. So I'm a big believer in writing as a reflection tool. I think there's another quote, I can't remember who, I'll look it up, that says, I don't know what I think until I write it down. Mm. And so sometimes it really helps me to process the world, to put it into written form. And I feel like I've been doing that since I was about, I'm sorry, I'm trying to get my picture together. There you go. Since I was about 13, when I started to write poetry. And I've really experimented with the form. You know, I was a theater major, so I've written a couple of plays. A couple years back, I did an album where I wrote a bunch of songs and combined them with some spoken word. And my first book, like Deborah, was, you can't see my face, you can't see Asia's video. Can you block, oh, that's the problem. Can you block out the one that's just the square with my name? You see right how I'm on twice? I'm on my computer and I'm on my phone. And on my phone, you can see my face. But what's lit up right now is just my name.
So what they would, oh, because on this end it shows, so I could delete one.
Yeah, delete the one that's just my name, that one.
Okay. Okay. Now we can't hear you though. We can't hear you. All right. As Asia's getting that together, I'm gonna go into the audience. I see Anika Quinana. She was here last week on the Black Artists Matter Part 2. She's named some names of Dominique Clayton, Tarika Wilson. I saw Sandra Bland earlier. I saw Breonna Taylor earlier in terms of names. If anyone has questions, please feel free to post them here. Cameron, thanks for watching. Blue.
Hi, Cameron.
Thanks for watching. Okay, Asia's back. All right.
I am here. It's unfortunate because I had you plugged in on I was watching you guys on my computer, so I'm going to come back in a moment. But I'll finish what I was saying. I was saying that, like Deborah, I was inspired by my relationships. Kind of like that, why did he break up with me? I was trying to figure out, like, what am I doing wrong? Like, things were going really crazy. And when you look back, it's funny how some things that are like really sad at the time are actually kind of funny, and you learn certain lessons along the way. So that's kind of how I was inspired to write my first book. And then a few years ago, I decided that I wanted to write a sequel to that book, but I also really wanted to write a memoir about teaching. And so I decided to do both at the same time. And I don't know why I decided to do that, but it was crazy. It was intense. And I got, 2 drafts done, or got through the second draft of each book in about a year. But it's actually been over a year since I put them to the side and have not come back to them, just long enough to maybe do this third round of edits and get it out into the world, And I did run into some obstacles as far as like trying to get people to read my stuff for free, which was actually hard. Like, please, could you just read this and give me feedback? And people didn't have the time. I should have gotten into it now because people have time. So I'll get back into it. You're inspiring me to do that. But as far as what I'm reading, I really love reading stuff from other indie authors as well. I'm like sitting in my room right now. I'm just surrounded by books. I have my friend PJ's book, Forgiveness is Bliss. I'm about halfway through that. I've got my girlfriend Ingrid does a zine called Black Box. I've actually been thinking about sending it to you, Dr. Ross. So if you send me your address after the call, I'm gonna send you a copy. I'll have Ingrid send you a copy of Black Box. I'll pay for it. Because
I'll take it.
So yeah, that's what I'm reading. I've got some astrology books around here. I've got some lots of self-help books. I've got one next to me called Wishcraft, and then my daughter just gave me a book called The Lucifer Effect, which is about how good people turn evil. So that's on my nightstand because she wants me to read that.
Wow, that's pretty heavy. It's not. Yeah, no, I can appreciate one that that you have quite a few books that are around healing, and I feel like that's some of the same energy and feel that I get from some of the books that Deborah has created and produced. Want to go back to the audience really quickly and just say hi to everyone there. Few people have said hello. So hi Ty, hi Cameron, hi Mona. And there's also been a few questions. I'm gonna pop those questions in once I get through speaking to each person. And then after we've spoken to each person, we'll get into the specifics of those particular questions. Okay. I want to ask Angela, if you could share with us more about how you came to doing the work that you do in terms of your writing. I know that you do blogs, you've done essays, you do article writing, and I feel like your writing is such a practice. It's like art and science and it's like all of this put together, and you're also documenting in a way that I feel like your text is going to be something that anthropologists and people who are working on their dissertations years later, when they want to know more about the Black experience and Black artists, they're going to be going to your work. I'd like to hear more about how you came to doing that sort of writing.
Word. Yeah, I appreciate that. And thank you for having me on again. So honestly, I've always written. My family was very strict. And so as a result, I spent a lot of time at home kind of by myself, reading. And because they didn't have a lot of books for children, I ended up reading the books that were on my parents' bookshelf, which, were Baldwin and Morrison and Alex Haley. And, and a lot of it, I had to sit with a dictionary, right? Read the book, have the dictionary, and you come to a word you don't know. And it's like, okay, you look up the word and then have conversations with my parents about what I was digesting. And I'm so grateful for that now. I think I was resented it a bit when I was, a child, because you want to go out, you want to hit the go-go's out, you want to do things, and my parents are like, no, you're going to stay home, you're going to read, you're going to tune in. But all of that founded my political consciousness, right? All of it founded not only my political consciousness, but my understanding of what it is to be Black in this nation, and really what it is to be a Black body throughout the world. And film, really, and animation are kind of my first loves, and what my actual education and training is in. But I realized that there was a kind of freedom in language as well, right? That film was a language in and of itself, and that language was also freedom. And it wasn't until I was in school, in grad school, that I was realizing that most people are not steeped in the kind of history of Black creative genius, right? Most people are not well-read or well-versed, right, in our histories, and don't have that consciousness. And when I went into writing about critique, because I've never blogged before, actually, my website is just an archive of all of the places that I've been published. But I realized that there was a deep deficit as far as people who were writing critical commentaries about contemporary artists who were not white. And so the writing in that lane came out of a need, right, to counter erasure, ultimately. And because we know that ultimately, if you are not archived in some capacity, whether through film or through writing or through, critical contextualization, then you're easily forgotten. And this has been kind of the what many writers, scholars, academics right now, curators are trying to kind of buck against, right? Is those histories of erasure. And so much of my work kind of starts and continues from that space, right? And from that really critical charge. I feel that I'm continuing the work of, scholars like Dr. David Driscoll, who transitioned, a few months ago, who helped to found what we now understand to be African-American art history, right? And contextualize African-American and African artists within the greater lexicon of what we understand to be art history, right? And he was a functioning artist, right? He gave up, and I mean, he didn't give up, he was still working as an artist, but he could have just worked as an artist, as a professional contemporary artist himself, but he juggled and balanced and sacrificed that time and that energy in order to help found that field. And so I feel that I feel an obligation, and I also feel that we as writers have an obligation to continue the trajectories and continue the works of a lot of the, you know, wordsmiths that precede us, right? The folks whose shoulders we stand on, the folks whose words affirm us, right? The folks who we return to over and over and over again. We have a kind of responsibility to make more reverent work, to make more critical work, to make more work that contextualizes and bucks against the systems that attempt to erase us, that attempt to kill us, right? And so that's a lot of the work that I'm doing, and I'm reading a lot of stuff. So I don't know. I'm reading Fred Moten right now, like, who's kind of dense, but also just so brilliant. Black and Blur is an amazing text. I'm rereading Color of Law, which is really disturbing and disappointing because it's so thorough in its assessment of the ways in which state and federal systems have over and over and over again throughout history been on the wrong side of history, right? Chosen ultimately to disenfranchise Black and brown people. They chose, right? There are moments where it's like, hey, you have a choice. You can move in a righteous way. You can move in a civil and just way. And over again, those states and federal folks consistently chose to oppress us. And so what that's done is sort of remind me about the importance of how Black creative genius has always had to, how we, the artists, the writers, the creatives, the thinkers, we have had to found for ourselves a context, for ourselves a kind of safety, right? Because outside of ourselves, very rarely is that kind of support sustained, right? Very rarely is that kind of protection sustained. So I'm kind of, you know, feeding myself as much as possible with, you know, just scholarship that challenges me to have a deeper understanding of history, so that the writings that I'm doing and that I pray, you know, continue to do will have as much impact as the authors that are feeding me.
You're right. You know, a lot of people don't have, I feel like that experience of having those brilliant, you know, people very early on, if they didn't necessarily have it in school. And I feel like the people who I have interacted with who do, their depth of knowledge and grasp of it seems to be a little bit deeper, and there just seems to be a little bit more familiar with not just the artist or the author, but like the context, the idea, the concept. I want to go back to folks in the audience because they are saying hey and all of the things. Megan Lewis said Angela is brilliant. I agree. Melissa Erica said yes, that book is a must read. Mona Diallo also just said Angela with like 5 exclamation points. So thank you folks for that, and if you have questions, please do put them in the chat. I promise you we'll get to them. Brianna, I want to talk to you a bit about how you came to some of the writing that you came to, and I also want to know who were some of the first authors, Black authors, Black women authors, even more specifically, that you engaged with, that you read about or read of their work.
Yeah. So like Angela, I came to writing and reading from a young age. I unfortunately didn't have access to Toni Morrison or Baldwin or any of the canonical Black authors until I was older and in college. So my love for reading started with a very like white lens. Yeah, so like a lot of Judy Blume and like, you know, coming of age stories like that, which, you know, was what me and my girlfriends were reading because I grew up in a predominantly white suburb in Harford County. But the first novel that I remember reading when I was younger by a Black author was Sharon G. Flake. She wrote the book The Skin I'm In. And that was one of the first like young adult novels where I saw a character that looked like me and was having the same experiences as me. And that kind of opened up my ideas of like what stories were possible to tell. And yeah, so that's how I came to writing, through journaling. And the type of writing that I do is short stories. I just recently published a collection of short stories called Those Who Fly. It's this little thing, which was part of the requirement for the MFA program that I just graduated from. And yeah, that's what I do. And I write a lot of kind of like in a fantastical lean. I really like speculative fiction and fantasy. A lot of what I've been reading has been science fiction. Like I started quarantine off with Kindred by Octavia Butler. And right now I'm reading works from the Japanese author Haruki Murakami, I believe is how you pronounce his name. So I've been leaning more into science fiction, which I think is more palatable for me right now, like trying to disengage from like the realities of the world. So yeah, that's where I am with my writing.
Mm-hmm. That definitely makes sense to me in terms of all of the things we've reached for, in terms of like right now, whether like all the different ways of like looking for things to heal. Like I could definitely see how sci-fi is definitely not even in a way of like escapism, but just in a way of like I'd love to reimagine this world. Or I'd love to just like, you know.
Well, I think a lot of writing is about making sense out of nonsense. It's like creating a structure with language. So I feel like that's how I've been processing everything right now, is through journaling, which is a part of my brand's identity is journaling, specifically journaling with intention. And you can find out more information about that, I guess, through my bio. But yeah, it's important.
No, I love that. I love all of these different connections. I'm gonna go back to the audience, and a few people were definitely resonating with Judy Blume as an early read. Mona Diallo said that her first book that she read from cover to cover was The Hobbit. And C just said, yep, I read all of these and loved every moment. She also said, yes, Brianna, I grew up in Harfco. What is that? Harford County. Okay. Harford County, and had the same experience and loved me some Judy Blume. Someone else mentioned Babysitters Club, Sweet Valley High. Yeah, like I read all of those. I read those and Goosebumps and, you know, Little Women. Just so many different books that we've read that we have access to. TaRessa, I'd like to ask you also about your work. I know you have a book recently, I think, SWIRL Girl. I think it's something. SWIRL Girl. Something along those lines. And I would really love for you to first talk about how you came to writing. What are some of the first authors that you read? I know I'm giving you a lot in one thing. What are the first authors that you read, the first Black woman that you read, and tell us what you're up to now.
Okay, great. Hi, thank you for having me. I'm really honored to be here with this amazing panel and with you. This is really, really beautiful, so thank you. So I've been writing since I was 7 years old, and I made up a poem, and my mom told me it was good and said I should write it down. And she really took me pretty seriously as an author, so I started writing poems and writing them down, and at that point I decided I was going to be. I was a writer, so I was one of those obnoxious little kids when grown-ups would say, well, honey, what do you want to be when you grow up? And I said, well, I am a writer. So, you know, but that was just always my path, or my goal, rather. I didn't start actually writing books or anything until I was in my late 30s. So I've written a little bit of almost everything, you know, coming through the years. But as a child, lots of poetry, you know, suitably angsty, some plays, a few short stories, all that kind of thing, with no idea really what I wanted to write specifically or why. And then I started publishing books probably in my early 30s. And I've written an eclectic array of books. So the first one was about homeopathic medicine, because homeopathic medicine saved my life. And I wanted to, it was a thing, kind of a, just explaining it to lay people, because there weren't any books like that out. This was 1986 at the time. And then later I wrote a book on contracted Buffalo soldiers, history book for young readers, you know, educational. And then I started getting like really published. So the first big book was written with my ex-husband and father of our children, and it came out 20 years ago. And it was titled Love Supreme, Real Life Stories of Black Love. And there wasn't anything like that at the time. So it was a real intense goal to present portraits of a few well-known people, but mostly just regular people who had strong, healthy, loving marriages. It came out in 2000. It got a lot of buzz because it was published by a big publisher. It came out in February, so Black History Month, Valentine's Day. Hey, you know, ended up as a, you know, segment of Oprah's show, not as one of her, you know, book club books. And, you know, it did pretty well. And then we got divorced. So, and what's interesting is that people still love the book, but a lot of the couples in the book have now divorced. But, you know, that's real life too. But that was the goal at the time, that there really weren't, I think this is literally 20 years ago, so the year 2000, there weren't a lot of, you know, of examples out there. Since then, and that was nonfiction, and my ex-husband's a print journalist, so we did that one together. Written some fiction, done many anthologies, co-edited with the phenomenal writer and talent, Tracy Price Thompson. We did a short story anthology, Proverbs for the People, and then we did two that were kind of a series for Black women to heal from different issues. The first one was about colorism, titled Other People's Skin, and then the other one was exploring healing from different kinds of intimate violence. And they were both done with Tracy Price Thompson, Desiree Cooper, and Elizabeth Atkins. So those were the most recent ones. Oh, and I did a novel in the middle of all that called The Hot Spot, which was
Why not?
urban chick lit. Yeah, I was invited by one of my favorite authors, Donna Hill. And I was like, sure, why not? But I don't know, why not? So I've, you know, and then I kind of paused for a while. I've always done journalism. I've done some blogging, and to decide what I really want to do. This memoir just out is SWIRL GIRL, Coming of Race in the USA. I'll go that way so you can see it, kind of. And independently published, so I'm trying new things. Because the mainstream publishing world really isn't ready, and they've told me this, for this narrative, for a mixed race narrative that's not based in confusion, rejection, and tragedy. And they're just not. And there's nothing wrong with those narratives, but that's literally so, you know, I was like, I had to get to my 60s to read the book, to write the book, to see the book I wanted to read my whole life. I've never seen anybody in any book I could fully relate to. I could relate to this or I could relate to that, but it was always compartmentalized. So I was like, you know what? But this book was also an ancestral assignment, non-negotiable. So I didn't necessarily want to write it. I really didn't. But I knew why I was writing it, and it's grounded and steeped in great purpose. So people seem to like it, which I'm really glad about. And it's designed, I wrote it to start the conversation and to elevate the conversation, since nowadays there's sustained public conversation. It ebbs and it flows, depending a lot on what celebrities do or how they look or appear. But there's a sustained, for the first time in my life, and I think the first time in US history, a sustained ongoing public conversation about the dynamics of mixed race people's appearance and identity. And it's, you know, and my thing is like, but we're not usually at this point invited into those conversations. We're not welcome into those conversations. I've been blocked by a lot of prominent Black influencers on Facebook just for coming into the conversation and asking a question or saying, hey, I'd like to clarify something here. They're like, we don't like your tone, goodbye. But I understood that because nobody's ever heard from us. Nobody's ever heard from us unless our narrative is confused, rejected, and tragic. And so anything else is so uncomfortable that people do that. You know, people don't like it. So I said, well, this is my answer, that if you're open to another narrative that isn't grounded in those things, because most of us, our narratives are not grounded in those things.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, when I was born in the 1950s, let's be clear, but I was not unusual where I lived. So, you know, there was no sense of you're weird, you got to explain yourself, blah, blah. So, you know, I wanted another narrative that a younger mixed person could read and say, okay, well, that's not my story, but at least it's not the danger of the single story, right? That we've been stuck with for 400 plus years. So that's what drove SWIRL GIRL, and the subtitle is Coming of Race in the USA. It starts when I'm in middle school with the assassination of Dr. King and goes all the way through 3 days after President Barack Obama's historic election when he called himself a mutt on international television. So that's SWIRL GIRL. But I've written all kinds of things. I'm now working on a novel. I'm not a natural memoirist. I'm not able to journal. And I really, the whole time you're working on a memoir, you really wish you were somebody who journaled. So you could just edit and curate your journals, right? No, I couldn't do that. So memoir was not comfortable for me. It really tested me. It kicked my behind in every possible way as a writer, even as somebody who's been writing and being published for decades. It was hard. It was bone crushingly hard. And so I'm going back to fiction. You know, I'm working on a novel now that, again, tries to challenge some of the popular narratives we've been stuck with so that we can break down the barriers in our community, create more solidarity, get rid of the internal fighting so we can come together and fight the real enemy. That's really what my work is about.
I love it. I love it. I love that whole ancestral assignment and and you taking that ancestral assignment. Now that I've spoke with everyone, I want to go back to the audience, and I also want to pose some questions. So Ty Coleman said, yes, ancestral assignments. Ingrid Sibley said, ain't that the truth? Asia said, Children of Blood and Bone is also accessible. Tomi, how do you say her name? Tomi Adeyemi?
I think Adeyemi.
Adeyemi?
Great book. Yeah.
Yeah. So one of the things that I want to go back to one of the questions that was asked in the chat earlier, and it was a question that was posed by Ty. Who made space for you as a writer? I feel like I heard some of that from you, TaRessa, just in terms of your mom taking it seriously to that degree. You know, and I think that's such a big deal. Even having children I see whose parents take their drawings and frame them, you know, in nice matted board, nice frame, put the label on it. Who made space for you as a writer, and who inspires you as a writer? And anyone can take that.
Can I just piggyback, because I didn't get to
Sure.
To answer your first question. So the first Black woman writer, I read everybody like everybody else, although I'm a different generation, but I read everything. I really liked Dylan Thomas a lot as a child, Langston Hughes. My first Black woman writer was Gwendolyn Brooks. And I'm from Seattle. She came to Seattle. I was probably 10, 11, maybe 12. And I don't even remember the details, but I made my mother take me to meet her, and I had prepared my little poems, and I put them in a little booklet with a letter, and I asked her if she could please read them and tell me what she thought, and she did. She took it home to Chicago with her, and she sent it back with a lovely letter full of praise. I wish I had that letter, and encouragement. I mean, and I was, you know, pre-adolescent, right? that I have to tell you, that nothing else compared to that.
What would you say, Deborah? Who made space for you? And oh, you're muted. And who inspired you also? Oh, you're still muted. Let me see if I can unmute you. It says ask to unmute. There we go.
Here I am. I'm sitting here wondering who made space for me. I feel like I had to make space for myself.
Could you repeat that? You broke up for me a little bit.
I was sitting here listening to TaRessa and pondering your question, who made space for me? And I feel like I had to make space for myself. I had to fight to finish high school. I almost didn't because of my troubled household. I went to college on my own. Somehow I managed to go to college. And then when I met my daughter's father, he supported me in going to law school. So nobody ever told me when I was in school that I could write, but I had teachers. And that's why I love Asia so much, and I love teachers, because I had teachers, now that I think about it, because some of these questions, you know, you really don't think about how everything fits together all the time. And when I think about teachers, I had English teachers. So when I have to recant that statement that nobody made space for me, because my teacher, I had English teachers, art teachers who loved me, who tended to me, and they tended, and a good teacher not only tends to your mind, but they tend to your soul. And so I had teachers who tended to me, and they made sure that I knew, even though they could tell that something must have been going on at home that made it difficult for me, they made sure I knew that I was somebody and I had some capabilities and that I was smart. And so that took me to college, even though my parents didn't talk about college. That took me to law school 6 years after graduating from college. And then when I graduated from college and law school, my daughter's father, he was the first person who told me I could write. And I've been keeping a journal by that time for maybe a decade. So Brianna talked about journaling. I got so many journals now, I'm worried about what am I gonna do with them. You know, I'm like, oh my God, what do you do with your journals? Do you burn them? You don't want everybody to read all of that stuff you wrote? It's like, whoo, you're gonna lose some family and friends after your death. But it was the writers like Angela talked about, and I appreciate Angela's, I would say you are brilliant in the way that your brilliance comes from being steeped in in Baldwin and Langston Hughes, and I can speak on that because just this last week I've been doing Girl Trek, and every day we take a different woman and a different Black woman, and we look at her life. And the first day was Audre Lorde, and that's a bad sister right there. I mean, Audre Lorde, right? So I was reading her already, so I started digging deeper. And what I want to say about that is every day, then was Shirley Chisholm. And I want to tell you, someone just called me from New York before this, and she told me, a friend of mine, that they just opened a national park named after Shirley Chisholm. Y'all the first to hear about it, okay? That's some bad stuff. So reading Toni Morrison when I was The Bluest Eye, I got these books, I'm rereading them now. Sula, reading The Color Purple before we knew it was going to be a movie, you know. So all of these books, when you read these women, because I love men, I love James Baldwin, got to meet him a long time ago, but it's something about reading about your foremothers. And you realize that Ella Jo Baker she was doing what she did with very little concern about her life and safety. And then you realize that we could do more. I can do more. I can be more. So I think the writers, when you ask when I think about it, as I unpack this, just my brother actually introduced me to books when I was about 15. And he would just read a book and he would give me a book and he would give it to me to read. And then my sister turned me on to feminism. And so books, the people who wrote the books, Zora Neale Hurston, it's like they made space for me and they told me who I am and who I could be, and that who says you can't, Audre Lorde reminds us that, so what, you are afraid. Like, if you can work while you're tired, you can work while you're afraid. I mean, like I'm excited about it because I want everybody to do what Angela, everybody can't do it now. You know, Angela, you look like you're in your 20s. But maybe you could do it for your children and or your grandchildren. Put books around your grandchildren. Put books in the hands of your children young enough so that your mind, it shapes your mind the way I was listening to Angela, and I'm like, this comes from reading at a young age. And so that your mind is not filled with all this foolishness and shallowness that comes from being obsessed with getting a new pair of shoes. So I say all of the women who wrote before me, and James, I can't leave James Baldwin out because something about him touched my life deeply. But all of those women, Toni Morrison is one who said what TaRessa said, write the book you'd like to read. She said that. And so Love Addicted she actually inspired me. And Maya Angelou, I read most of all of her books. So those Black women writers who were really bold. And I sometimes struggle with the fear of saying what I really want to say, even at this stage of my life in writing. And I see, because I work with writers, the fear that a lot of Black people have or people have to write. And they wonder, they don't write, they think they don't write because they don't have time. But with the quarantine, a lot of people still not writing who said they wanted to write, but they're not writing because they haven't found their voice. And they haven't found their voice because a lot of them are not grounded and rooted in our foremothers, right? Because they don't know that Shirley Chisholm was talking bad before you were born, right? Shirley Chisholm was, Audre Lorde was claiming her lesbian, claiming, she's a lesbian, activist, mother, and poet, way before so I say read. I'm gonna tell you what all the other writers, and I'm saying this to those who are listening, do yourself a favor and read. I used to wonder why writers would say that. Alice Walker, she would just say, read. I was like, why do you want to read? Why do you want to read so much? And now I know why, because it shapes your mind. Yeah. You're not the same person.
Let me say really quick, you are setting off the chat room right now in the group. So Ty says, if you can, he's quoting you, if you can work while you're tired, you can work while you're afraid. Phew, what a word. Yes, we are preaching to the choir, but I wish we could spread the message far and wide. CJ says, amen, Deborah. The fear is real. The fear is so real.
Yeah.
Ty says, I agree. This panel is a testimony to the necessity of Black women and Black women's art. Before I move forward, because I want to talk to Brianna, and Brianna, I want to talk to you about the significance of journaling, why that's so important that we write our stories. But I want to ask the audience really quickly if they could recommend 1 or 2 books that they would give to a little Black or brown girl, what could you type in the chat for us what those books would be that you would pass along to your 9-year-old self, and then one for your 15-year-old self, and then maybe one for your 18-year-old self, or just books that really touch you that you would share with the young Black girl, whether she's aspiring writer or not, just like in encouraging that level of not just literacy, but to look to people who may have some similar lived experiences as she does, for guidance, for inspiration, for story, for adventure. Flossie Cleo says that they would recommend SWIRL GIRL. What are some other books that folks would recommend? And I would also, I'm going to say now and I'll say again later, a call to action that everyone in this chat and everyone on the panel, so I'm sure you are probably already have on some level, buy a book for a Black girl. Buy, everybody in the chat, buy a book for a Black girl. So on our end, in our chat, Deborah says Bluest Eye, oh my gosh. Little Breedlove, Pecola Breedlove.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, forever be, you know, just a part of my life, like as a living character. Suge Avery will forever be a part of my life as a real character. Yeah, so I wanted to let you guys know, so in our green room, folks are some of the authors are chatting, but if you type it into the Facebook, they'll be able to see it, but I will read off. So there's Bluest Eye, Toni Morrison. I've shrunken my screen. Yes to, into, I'm not gonna pronounce it right. I never get her name right. Can someone say it for me? She wrote for Colored Girls.
Ntozake Shange.
Yes, and the book it looks like is Teen Gorilla My Love by Toni
Cade Bambara. Mm-hmm.
Kane Bam.
It's to be Cade, yeah, Bambara.
Kane? Okay.
Cade.
Toni K. Bambara. Uh-huh.
Okay.
Okay.
They said it. Everything by Jacqueline Woodson and Sharon Draper. The Color Purple, Alice Walker. Sula by Lupita Nyong'o. I'm not sure if I said that right. And buy a book from a Black store. Yes. Deborah added, buy a book from a Black store. I know about this Cage Bird Sings, Maya Angelou. And the People Could Fly, Black Feminist Thought, Patricia Hill Collins, definitely changed my life. So those are some of the books. I'll look in the chat and see anything from Maya Angelou. Someone said Akata Witch Bayandi, Akofora. I don't think I got that one right either. Brianna, could you say that for me?
All right, it's Nide Okorafor. She's Nigerian.
Okay.
I try.
No worries. No, listen. Ty recommended Kindred. So, you know, the call to action, speeches of Malcolm X and Marcus Garvey definitely changed my life. Buy a book for a Black girl, buy it from a Black store. All right, I'm going to get into Brianna. Talk to us about why journaling.
So journaling, at least for me, has always been like the one place where I have complete autonomy, whether it's through the way that I work through my thoughts or the way that I shape the story that's happening around me, to try to make sense of it all. Journaling is just, it's so cathartic and it's so accessible. Like if you are literate, you can keep a journal, and or maybe not even if you aren't literate, like you can draw, you can collage in it. Like it's just the possibilities for creativity and record keeping and note taking is just endless in a journal. And yeah, and I think that everyone should keep one. Some of the work that I've been doing, so with 1134 Press, which is my indie press, that I published my collection of short stories through, I partnered with a local doula to Baltimore. Her name is Bree Mobley. And we created a self-care journal specifically for moms, which has guided prompts and, like weekly to-do list and quotes from our favorite authors. And so that's, I just think that self-care should just be a part of everyone's, or journaling should always be part of everyone's self-care routine. Yeah.
I love it. I agree. What was the quote? I think Deborah shared it earlier. Was it Deborah or Asia that shared about writing because it's cheaper than therapy?
Mm-hmm. It is 100%.
I definitely think it's important for that. And I also feel like there's a significance to writing our stories down. Because people just aren't writing our stories. One of the challenges that I had when I was working on I muted myself. One of the challenges that I had when I was working on my dissertation is there's when you type in mother or motherhood, there is so many books written about white women's mothering process, their memoirs, articles from their vantage point. And a lot of the things that I just found around Black motherhood were just like looking at Black women very much from a deficit standpoint, very much looking at them through the lens of their ability to produce and what they produced and the way in which what they produced impacted the overall economics of the country. So,
and as far as I know, this might be for us, a self-care journal for mamas might be the only self-care guided journal specifically for Black women. If we could double check, but I'm pretty sure that this is one of the only ones. Because we did a lot of research to create this book, and we thought that that part of the narrative was very important to contribute.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I want to ask Asia and Angela, and I'll start with Asia. In your opinion, what is the role of literature in culture? Oh, you're muted. You're muted, Asia.
Unmute. There we go.
Okay.
I was just saying that's a deep question, but I think it's a part of culture, right? So it can be culture in itself. Like I feel like it's an element of culture, and then it's also a tool for documentation. Like we could put these books in time capsules, right? I was speaking to my sister last night about how much I love science fiction. And what I love about science fiction as it relates to culture is that some of it is apocalyptic and it warns us, like, if you continue to live this way, this is what could happen. But there's also this role of imagining ourselves into a future and creating worlds that don't yet exist but could exist, right? And I think about like the time that we're in, specifically right now. I have been doing so much reading, and it's not literature, but I'm reading a lot of perspective. I'm reading I love argument, right? A discussion, and different viewpoints and people. What I'm noticing right now is a boldness that has come out of this movement, that the energy is affecting people in a way that they are telling their stories. And we're using social media to tell those stories, right? So yeah, I think there's a million roles that it plays, but it's definitely an essential part. The other thing I want to make sure I go back to very quickly, you asked a question earlier about who made space for you. And I definitely want to make sure that I give a shout out to all the teachers. I know you're doing a show on teachers next week. So early shout out to them, because definitely one of the people who made space for me as a writer was my 5th grade teacher. Every year I got to move up a year in reading, because I was always, you know, we had these reading circles, but I was always like, go to the next grade. So by the time I got to 5th grade, it was the end of elementary school. We didn't have a middle school there. So she created an entire poetry unit just for me. My teacher did. And that was the beginning of, you know, my love affair with poetry. She didn't have to do that. I'm sure that was, as a teacher myself now, I realize how much extra work that was. But she did that. I also just want to say, before you move on to Angela, that you made me think with your post when you said a lot of books about boys and their dogs. And we were talking earlier in the chat about Ty was saying that they thought that there were no Black YA novels. I remember the first long young adult chapter book that I read in the 5th grade was called The Yearling, and it was about a white boy and his deer. It was really good, but you're absolutely right.
Yeah, I mean, it was in abundance. White, like, that's literally, I felt like that's all I saw was just like white boys and their dogs in elementary school when I was looking to read all the time. I know we're over time. I do want to get to Angela, and I also want everyone to get an opportunity to share where they're up to, what they're up to, where can people find you next, where can they follow you, where can they purchase your book, and all of that. Thank you, Brianna. Brianna has posted it in the Facebook group, so please post in the Facebook group so people can follow you. Put your Instagram, if you don't currently have merch, put your Instagram, your website, all the ways for people to connect with you. Angela, tell us in your words, what is the role of literature in culture?
Yeah, I think thinking back to, I'd forgotten this, maybe I blocked it out, but when I always knew that words were significant and incredibly important, but I didn't realize how powerful and profound words could be and the impact that they could have until I was almost expelled from middle school for writing down a poem by Ursula Rucker that was featured on Do You Want More album by The Roots. So Black don't crack, so I'm in my mid-30s, right? But you know, The Roots album came out and I was just so moved by this poem, and I wanted to show my best friend, right? I was like, and if you are not familiar with this poem, it's called The Unlocking. And it's graphic because it essentially is the story of a woman who has been gang raped and then comes back and asserts her power, right? And I was moved by the story because it was the first time that I had read something other than like Beloved by Toni Morrison that was so kind of guttural, but also that showed women with machetes, women with guns, you know, women as affirmed and confident and powerful. And and my mother was so disappointed with me because we had to sit, you know, in this principal's office, and I had to defend myself. She was proud of me for defending myself, but she was disappointed that I chose that poem as a kind of, you know, as an inspiration, right, of all the things that I could have chosen. And so to that end, I think that literature, the role of literature and culture is always to challenge us, right? Always to push us. And I appreciate what AJ was saying about the importance of imagining a future. I've been thinking a lot, and the importance of speculative fiction, as many others on the panel have spoken about. There was a beautiful panel with Tananarive Due talking about how Octavia Butler Benn knew, right? How basically she was a prophet. And if you've read any of her work, particularly Parable of the Sower, it's so relevant to the contemporary moment. And so in that regard, writers and thinkers and artists and creatives, I again echo that I think our role is to challenge and to imagine and to push the bars and to encourage and to affirm and to contextualize everything that's happening in the world, because the book itself is an archive, right? Our words and our words are an archive as well, right? Like we are, how we're contextualizing this moment and all of the moments that preceded and the moments that have yet to come are the ways that this moment will be remembered, right? And there's some, there's a kind of responsibility with that and an urgency with that as well. So if you are feeling hesitant about writing or feeling hesitant about throwing your hat in the gigantic ring of, creative writers, thinkers, dreamers, don't, do it, put your words out there. We need to hear your words. There's Black women writers are some of the most affirming writers that I have ever experienced. But even when we put that categorization, like we have to remember that Black women writers, that's not a monolith, right? We are not a monolithic group of people. We are not homogenous, right? There are many different kinds of experiences. Black experience is broad. It is diverse, and so we need many writers from many different lanes, all speaking to that, so that as many folks on the panel have spoken to, the violence of that singular narrative is not perpetuated.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. I love the mentioning of how the writing marks space and time, and like document like our individual stories, our collective stories, how we can envision a future. I love reading anything Afrofuturistic, because of like all of the tenets of Afrofuturism. It is the full hour. I will give, does anyone have any last thoughts? I want to go ahead and plug in again and say really quick, thank you so much to everyone who is watching live. Stacy Patton said, beautiful panel. Ingrid Sibley says, beautiful message, Angela, thank you. Deborah, thank you for putting your link in. And Deborah also lists her books, Love Addicted, One Woman's Spiritual Journey Through Emotional Dependency. I also want to still, and Angela also shared her link to her website as well as her IG. I definitely want to push through the call to action. Buy a book for a Black girl from a Black store. Yeah, I'll just keep saying that. And if there are any last thoughts from any of our panelists.
I want to encourage people who want to write to start and just know that writing is not something that you do well when you first start.
Oh my gosh. Can you pause on that for just 1 second? That's a whole, I can't tell you the value of that. You just struck a nerve, because if you don't know that and you go into this practice, not having it will make you feel like you're not good enough, you're not smart enough, you don't have it figured out. And I feel like even as an adult, I got to a point where when I wasn't getting it right and the first two drafts wasn't right, it made me feel something very negative. But I'm gonna let you finish. I just, when you said that, it was just like, it instantly resonated me. And I was like, I wish somebody would have told me that.
Writing is revising.
Actually, I had two professors say to me, one when I was in college and one when I was in law school. And they said the exact same thing. There's no such thing as writing, it's rewriting. And so, and it's a craft. So it's not something that you do, even if you get really, really good at it, you didn't start out that way. So I would encourage people to write, and journaling, as we know, right? Us who journal, we know that that helps you become a better writer. So write, journal, keep writing, keep reading, and never stop, because somebody wants to read what you have to say. But you have to know that you have to find your own unique voice. None of us speak from the same voice. We all have our own unique voice.
Yes. Melissa Erica said, damn, writing is revising sheets. That's the truth. She said, ugh. Amber says, thank you for these many wonderful suggestions. Cedra says, oh man, it left. There was a thank you for you, Deborah. You'll be able to see it in the comments. Ty says, giving myself permission to write the first draft is the hardest part of writing for me. Hardest part. And I think, you know, Deborah, you also know a little something about that because you have that, write that book.
Yes, I have it right here. It's a very small book, but I wrote it for people who would come up to me and say, I have a story for you to write, and I can't write their story. And so I would say, you write it, and this is just to get you started. Yeah, so I'm gonna put my other link in there to my other website. But the important thing is to just dive in, and as the person said, that the first draft is the hardest, but if you never do the first draft, you can't get to the fifth one. You'll never have a fifth draft.
Right. Any other last thoughts? Cedra says, thank you all for sharing. Rasheem, thank you for putting this together.
Yes, thank you, Rasheem.
No problem. I appreciate y'all. This is therapy for me. This is therapy, and I feel like this is my work. You know what I mean? I feel like this is part of my work.
Well, you do it really well. You do a beautiful job. Seriously.
Yeah.
Thank you. I appreciate that because I don't be feeling like I be doing it well, so I appreciate that.
Oh, that's how we writers feel about 99% of the way through.
Right. Right.
That's another show.
Right.
The imposter syndrome, right?
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
So I want to thank you all again so much, Deborah, Brianna, Asia, Angela, TaRessa. I want to thank you for coming on here. I want to thank you for the work that you do. I want to thank you for the words that you put on paper. I want to thank you to because each one of you are going to go buy. I know you've probably already bought a Black girl a book, especially you, Deborah, because your kid is in college, so you done bought several books. I think she graduated, so you done bought plenty of books.
She already moved to New York, and she started a fellowship a couple of weeks ago.
Yeah.
Master's degree in English or something, teaching. So you're right.
Yeah.
My girl is about the age of these other two young ladies, Brianna and Angela.
So thank you again. And that concludes this episode of the Counter Narrative Show, Black Women Write. Please do stop by and join us next week where we talk about teaching in a crisis. I'll be speaking with teachers about their lived experiences of working or trying to work through this, teaching students online with limited access to things and resources, and you'll hear directly from them about what it's been like for them teaching in the crisis. Thank you so much for stopping by, and have an awesome day.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. I'll lift my way. Bye.
Thank y'all. Be safe. Stay encouraged.
It's an honor. Blessings to everybody.
Thanks.